Morning light trickled through the dusty slats of Herschel Brand's barn, painting gold streaks across the hay-choked floor. He woke early that day, as he always did, riding in from his sprawling pastures before the sun nudged the horizon. The air was crisp, carrying the distant bray of a mare and the metallic tinkle of feeding buckets. Stomping his boots through scattered straw, he intended to check the new colts and feed his prize cattle. That's when he spotted them. A woman, pale and slumped at the far end of the loft, and at her side lay a dog, brindled and fierce in its silent vigil. She looked more shadow than flesh, an injured wraith cradled by an enormous Great Dane. Herschel's pulse throbbed in sudden alarm. He cleared his throat, and it sounded loud in the vaulted barn, startling the dog first. The animal raised its head, ragged breaths escaping between hackled ribs. Beside it, the woman stirred, eyelids fluttering open to gray eyes laced with pain. Her dress was torn and stained, mud and blood and perhaps whiskey, and her left hand curled around the dog's neck. He held his breath. For years he'd been thinking in deals and feed counts. But in that moment, all he felt was compassion, the kind that comes suddenly, without invitation, in the face of vulnerability. He eased forward, arms held out at chest height. "Easy now," he said, voice low. The dog raised a lip and growled, but neither advanced. The woman's eyes flicked between him and her companion, as if weighing both their threats and their hopes. He lowered himself and knelt on one knee. "Ma'am, are you hurt bad?" She shook her head slowly. Her voice came with the rasp of someone unused to speaking. "Help me, he's hurt." She pointed at the dog's hindquarters, gaping wound, raw flesh showing. Herschel's breath caught in his throat. He placed a hand on one of the barn's support posts, steadying himself. "All right, come with me." He moved a few steps back, scanning the barn for anything handy. A blanket, a rope, a water bucket. The dog watched, torn between guarding and trusting, her lips twisted into something like a ghost of a smile. "That's good dog," she croaked. He tossed her his coat and held it out. The woman lifted, wounded legs weak and clammy. Together they leaned on him as he guided them toward the yard. He fetched water and towels from the farmhouse and slipped inside himself once more, tossing a fresh shirt in with the coat. By the time he returned, the dog had curled around her like a protective serpent. He knelt again, murmuring gentle words. She flinched as he rinsed the wound, eyes squeezed shut. "It's deep," she whispered. Herschel met her gaze. "You'll live." She nodded, but cold fear trembled in her chest. She tried to stand. He steadied her again. "My name's Herschel Brand." "Evelyn," she managed, voice a thread. He used his belt as a tourniquet and wrapped a clean cloth, her shirt sleeve, he realized, and twisted it until bleeding slowed. She lay back down and he covered her in his coat, glancing up at the sky. By his reckoning, there were still hours of daylight left. "She needs to rest," he said to the dog, though the animal's intelligence was not lost on him. The dog released a low whine, shifting closer. Herschel fetched a lantern and booted shut the barn doors. Inside felt sacred, golden beams, the scent of hay, the woman and her guardian dog as if placed by fate. He sighed. He would haul her to the house. As he prepared a makeshift stretcher, 2 broad planks and a blanket, the dog sat up, watching him with 2 colored eyes, cold steel and molten gold. Herschel tapped the wood. "Help me, boy." "Why is he?" The dog lay back down and Herschel lifted the planks under Evelyn. They stumbled out onto the porch. He looked at the dusty road before them, the empty fields beyond, and then at the small farmhouse they had made together years ago. Evelyn's breath came in short jags now. He carried her inside, set her on the sofa, and gently wound damp cloth around her wound to keep pressure. The dog hopped beside her, tail wagging gently, a gesture of relief. Evelyn looked past Herschel to the dog. "He's my dog." Herschel nodded. "He's a good one." He searched the pantry, fetched clean water, and sat beside her. She swallowed. He looked at her face, hollow-cheeked, pale, and felt a swarming protectiveness. This town saw him as a prosperous rancher, a man of little mercy to dishonest neighbors. But this woman on this day changed everything. He stayed by her side until dusk and beyond, lighting candles around the room, changing cloth, speaking in soft reassurances that made her lean into him as if she had nowhere else to rest. The dog's deep growls of contentment, trust, echoed through the wood frame of the house. At midnight she slept. Herschel watched her breathing rise and fall. In the silence he thought of the blood on the barn floor and his coat, now torn and uncomfortable. Outside, a howl sounded, maybe wolves or coyotes testing the perimeter. His mind flickered with recollections. A sister he lost at 14 to fever, the ache of helplessness. He stepped outside, coat thrown over his shoulders, gun belt against his hip. The night was cold, stars pinpricks overhead. The dog was there, waiting, its head heavy. He patted its flank. "She'll be fine," he said. The dog just looked up at him, its eyes solemn. He looked back toward the house and felt a shiver that had little to do with cold. He was a wealthy rancher. His name meant something in this valley. But for Evelyn and her guard dog, he was just a man who might save them. The future hinged on this moment, what he did next. By dawn, Evelyn's fever had broken. Herschel found her tangled in the throw blanket, her brow damp, lips parted in a shallow breath. The dog, Rook, she'd called him in sleep, sat upright by her side, his tail thudding softly against the floor at Herschel's approach. He crouched and lifted Evelyn's wrist, feeling for pulse, still strong. He stood and stoked the fire, then stepped onto the porch to take in the morning. The sun rose blood-orange over the hills, carving the shadows out of the fields and fencing. His ranch hands were late, or maybe cautious. Few of them came near the house since he lost his wife to a winter cough 3 years prior. Inside, Evelyn stirred. He heard the boards creak beneath her slight frame and returned to find her struggling to sit up. "Careful," he said. She winced. "Your barn, You're in the house now. You passed out. Had some kind of infection setting in your shoulder, might still." Her eyes tracked the room. She took it in with a hunger that wasn't just curiosity, it was survival. The hearth, the walls, the clean water in a porcelain basin. She relaxed against the cushions. "You didn't have to help," she said. "I know." Rook stepped closer to her, and she ran her fingers down his spine. Herschel noticed now that her dress had been roughly stitched in places, the fabric worn thin. She wasn't just passing through, she was running from something. "Rook took a bullet," she said, 2 nights ago. "I think it grazed me." "Who was shooting?" She hesitated, her jaw set. Men who follow trails, men who don't ask names. Herschel's silence lingered in the space between them like fog. He crossed to the kitchen and began slicing dried venison. The sound of the knife was steady, deliberate. "You hungry?" She nodded. He served it with bread and a weak broth, the kind he made for himself when he couldn't stomach whiskey. Evelyn ate slow, careful. Rook sat close, waiting for scraps. Later, he brought out the .3030 and cleaned it in her view, not for intimidation, but transparency. She watched him closely. When he asked if she had any kin, she shook her head. "I had a brother once, and a husband after. Neither one could outrun what followed them." "What follows you?" he asked. Her eyes flared with something too old for her age. "Justice. Or the lack of it." She refused to say more, but over the next week she began to heal. Herschel saw her strength in the way she walked, favoring one side yet refusing a cane. He saw it in her care for Rook, dressing his wound with herbs she foraged herself from the woods. The dog grew stronger too, trailing her like a shadow. She never asked to stay, and he never told her to leave. But by the second week, the town began to whisper. Herschel took her into the hills one morning under the guise of showing her the land. They rode on horseback, she atop his mare, her frame still light from too many days without food. At the highest point, overlooking the brand spread, she looked down on the valley with a soldier's scrutiny. You've got too much open land, no cover if someone wants to burn you out. He studied her profile. You think like someone who's been hunted. I was born in Kansas, lived near Oswatomi during the raids. My mother survived a house fire that killed her parents. I learned early not to trust what you can't outrun. She finally told him that night about the 3 men who tracked her. They had ridden into her last camp outside Amarillo. One had tried to take Rook, another tried to take her. They left her for dead, shot in the arm and shoulder. She crawled 2 miles before the dog dragged her to cover. You think they'll come here? He asked. I know they will. Herschel didn't flinch. He had fought off cattle thieves and regulators, spent his younger years on the Confederate side of Missouri, where betrayal came wearing a friend's face. He began boarding the windows that night. By the 3rd week, Evelyn began to recover faster than anyone expected. Her hands were steady, and she could shoot again. Herschel set up targets behind the barn, and she took to the pistol like it was an extension of her will. Reckon I should teach you how to reload, he said one afternoon. I already know. When he offered her one of his rifles, she rejected it. My father gave me one before the war. If I ever find it again, that's the one I'll carry. The town noticed her now. A woman in trousers, walking with a limp, seen buying feed for a dog half the town feared. Whispers curled through the saloons and supply stores. The sheriff came up to Herschel's place one morning, hat in hand. You harboring someone. I take in strays, Herschel said flatly, same as always. Well, some folks say she fits a description, said a marshal from down south looking. Herschel's face didn't change. Tell that marshal to find me if he's got cause. He left the sheriff in the yard and walked back to the barn where Evelyn was oiling a knife blade. She looked up at him sharp-eyed. Do you trust me? She asked. I trust what you've survived. That night, Rook bristled at the door. Herschel stepped outside, hand resting on his Colt. No one there, but he didn't sleep. Neither did Evelyn. By dawn, horse tracks curled behind the barn and disappeared east. Someone had been watching. The trail was fresh, 3 horses, 2 shod, 1 running light. Herschel crouched at the edge of the barnyard, fingers pressed into the dry prints. Evelyn stood behind him, rifle slung across her back, her eyes fixed on the horizon like she was reading ghosts. Rook paced in slow, wide circles, sniffing low. They circled wide, she said. Didn't want to be seen, just wanted to see. Herschel nodded, testing the place, seeing who's home, who's armed. Which means they'll come back at night. That evening, he sent his ranch hands to the bunkhouse with orders to stay put and keep watch from a distance. Evelyn helped him set traps along the perimeter, trip wires at knee height, glass shards in the dirt near the chicken coop, a pit behind the woodpile filled with sharpened stakes. She worked with quiet precision, her limp nearly gone. You've done this before, Herschel said as they layered fresh brush over the pit. I was married to a Pinkerton once, she replied. Didn't last, but I learned what I needed. She didn't smile when she said it, and neither did he. By midnight the house was dark, save for a single lamp low in the parlor window. Herschel sat by it, shotgun across his knees. Evelyn waited upstairs with a revolver and Rook at her side. The silence stretched tight across the property. They came just before dawn, quiet riders, boots wrapped in cloth, using the tree line and slope of the land for cover. But the dog was first to react, a low growl rising like thunder from the belly of the house. Herschel slipped to the porch and fired once, high and wide, just to break the silence. Then the real shooting began. The first man stepped into the trap behind the barn. A scream split the dark as the pit swallowed him. The second tried to come through the corral but hit the tripwire, his horse spooking and throwing him hard. The third, bigger, older, charged straight up the center, gun drawn, screaming Evelyn's name like a curse. She met him at the top of the stairs. Her shot caught him in the thigh, the second in the shoulder. He fell against the banister, crashing down in a heap. Rook stood over him, growling so low it rattled the floorboards. Herschel hauled the others in at gunpoint, one bleeding badly, the other moaning in the pit. Evelyn stood silent as they were tied to the fence post. Blood dripped into the dust. The sun rose behind them, painting the scene with gold and fire. The bigger one, the one who knew her name, spat at the ground. "You don't get to start over, Evie." She knelt before him, face unreadable. "I'm not starting over," she said. "I'm finishing." They said nothing else until the sheriff arrived, hat clutched in both hands. His deputy behind him stared wide-eyed at the broken bodies, the traps, the dog with blood on its muzzle. Herschel leaned against a post, still holding the shotgun. "Marshall's men," the sheriff said, voice tight. "They weren't supposed to come this far." "Then your marshal lost control of his leash," Evelyn said, wiping her hands on her trousers. The sheriff looked to Herschel. "This'll bring questions, trouble." Herschel just looked at him, then let it. He turned back to Evelyn. "You all right?" She didn't answer, just looked toward the hills, where the sun was rising and nothing stirred. For the first time in weeks, her shoulders dropped from around her ears. They buried the man from the pit near the ravine. The other two were taken by the sheriff, bound and broken. Herschel watched them disappear down the road and knew they'd speak lies in town. That Evelyn had seduced him, that she was hiding secrets worth killing over. But he didn't care. She stayed, at least for now. They repaired the banister together. She stitched a new bandage for Rook's flank. When Herschel asked where she wanted to go next, she said nowhere. "They were the last," she said, "the only ones who knew what happened, what I did." "And what did you do?" he asked. She looked at him long. "I survived. They didn't like that." Rook barked once, low and firm, like a seal of judgment. Herschel nodded. She began working the ranch with him, quietly, competently. The cattle took to her, so did the land. Townfolk came by less often, but when they did, they noticed how she stood on the porch now, not behind it. How the dog never left her side. How Herschel spoke less, but when he did, it was always about building something lasting. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived. Herschel didn't recognize the seal. Evelyn opened it slowly and read in silence. "What is it?" he asked. She folded it once, then again. "An invitation," she said, "to testify about what they did." "What I saw." He leaned back in his chair. "You want to go?" She looked toward the barn, toward the hills. "No, but I should." He nodded slowly. "Then we'll go together." They left before sunup, horses packed light, rifles strapped down, Evelyn's hair bound tight beneath a felt hat. The dog rode in the wagon, tongue lolling, eyes scanning the horizon like he understood what they were riding toward. Herschel had only been east of the range twice in 10 years, both times for cattle business, never for anything as personal as this. The letter had come from a circuit judge in Wichita. The testimony concerned a string of deaths in Texas. Men Evelyn once rode with, Pinkerton hires gone rogue, who'd taken the law into their own hands and left no witnesses but her. She hadn't spoken of them by name, not yet, but their sins clung to her like old smoke. They crossed into Kansas on the third day. Dust caked the wagon wheels. A storm had passed through 2 nights before, cutting ruts into the road and washing out the low trails. Evelyn rode silent most of the way, her eyes fixed on the curve of the land, as though it held secrets she hadn't yet spoken. "Why now?" Herschel asked her one morning as they cooked over a fire of juniper and fencewood. "They never stopped looking," she said, "and if I don't name them in court, they'll never stop for someone else." The courthouse sat squat and solemn in the center of town. When they arrived, folks stared, not at Herschel, though he was recognizable even here, but at her. She didn't dress like a witness. She didn't tremble or walk soft. She stepped through those doors like someone returning to a battleground. Inside, the judge was an older man with a grim mouth and eyes like rusted iron. He asked her 3 questions before they even sat. Name, origin, what you saw. She answered all of them in a voice that didn't waver. She told them about Eli Carver, the marshal who took her husband's badge and turned it into a death sentence for settlers who didn't pay their way. About the fires they set, the women they didn't spare. About how she survived a hanging meant to send a message and how Rook pulled her from the noose. She didn't cry. She didn't blink. And when she was done, the judge leaned back and said, "You understand what this means. You'll be hunted again. Your face is no longer lost to time." "I was hunted already," she said. "Now I get to hunt back." The court clerk filed the papers. Warrants would go out by week's end. That night they stayed in a boarding house on the edge of town. Rook lay at the foot of her bed, twitching in sleep. Herschel sat in the rocker by the window, watching the quiet street, shotgun across his knees. "You think we'll make it back clean?" she asked. He glanced at her. "No." She smiled just a little. "Me neither." 2 days out of Wichita, they ran into trouble. It started with a rustle in the brush. Rook went stiff, hackles high. Herschel pulled up the wagon just in time. The first bullet whined off the wheel iron. The second hit the back board. They both dove off the sides, guns drawn, hearts hammering. 3 men emerged from the trees. One had a scar across his cheekbone. Evelyn froze, jaw tight. "Marshal Carver," she said, spitting his name like a stone. He tipped his hat. "Miss Calloway, I hear you've been talking." Herschel raised his rifle. "You've got one chance to leave." Carver smiled. "I don't believe I do." The fight was fast and ugly. Rook went first, leaping into the man on the left, teeth flashing. Evelyn shot the second in the throat. Herschel dropped to a knee and fired twice into Carver's chest, the second shot lifting him off his feet. He landed hard, didn't move. The clearing stilled. Rook limped back, muzzle bloodied, one ear torn. Evelyn knelt beside him, stroking the side of his face, murmuring words no one else could hear. She stood and looked at Herschel. He was the last. He looked down at Carver's body, half in shadow, half in blood. "No," he said. He was just the loudest. They buried the men beneath the sycamores, said nothing, just marked the ground with stones. They rode in silence for a while after that, but it was a different silence. Not fear, not dread, something settled. Like the storm had broken. By the time the ranch came back into view, fence lines, smoke from the chimney, the windmill spinning lazily in the breeze, Evelyn let herself exhale. Rook barked once, home, but the town had changed. Whispers again, rumors of what happened in Kansas, of the marshal's death. Herschel found a notice nailed to his barn, "Justice is not yours to take." He pulled it down without a word. That night, Evelyn burned it in the hearth. The flames licked it into smoke. Rook slept by the fire. Herschel poured her a drink. "No going back," she said. "Wasn't planning to," he replied. Winter rode in hard that year, early frost biting the pastures before the cattle could be rotated. Herschel's hands worked double hours driving the herds toward lower ground, but Evelyn stayed at the house, posted near the porch, watching the road. The note on the barn hadn't been the last. Someone left a dead crow on the steps a week later, its wings splayed and neck snapped, feathers still warm when she found it. She said nothing to Herschel that night, just fed Rook the marrow from a boiled beef bone and sat near the fire, sharpening her blades. He watched her from the kitchen. The way her hands moved, slow and practiced, reminded him of a soldier preparing not for a battle, but a siege. By mid-December, a name began to circulate: Donovan Blake. He wasn't Law, not anymore. He had ridden with Carver years back, left the badge behind when the killings began, but never walked away from the code they lived by: burn what cannot be ruled. Herschel remembered the name from a cattle fair in Laredo. Even then, Blake had a reputation for cruelty beneath a gentleman's smile. Evelyn knew he'd come. "He's the kind that don't just send warnings," she said one morning as snow dusted the corrals. "He sends fires." So they prepared. The traps were reset. A new rifle was brought in from Denver, a long-barreled sharpshooter with scope and glass sight. Herschel built a tower in the far field, disguised as a haystack. From there, Evelyn could see 5 miles in every direction. She took to watching it daily, her silhouette a fixed shape above the snow, like a crow waiting for a corpse. They had 1 month of quiet. Rook healed. The wounds on his shoulder closed to tight knots of scar. Evelyn found herself walking the property more often, marking paths only she could read. She wore trousers now full-time, tucked into weathered boots, hair always bound, knife always close. On the 3rd week of January, fire bloomed on the ridge. A hay barn 3 miles south, on neighbor Glenroy's land, lit up like kindling. Herschel and Evelyn rode out, rifles strapped, Rook pacing the horse's heels. By the time they arrived, there was nothing left but ash and hoof prints in the snow. "Didn't steal a thing," Glenroy spat, "just burned it like a message." But the message wasn't for Glenroy, it was for her. That night they doubled the watch. Herschel barely slept. Evelyn paced the porch till near dawn, her breath misting in the cold, Rook sitting beside her like a black statue. The wind carried voices sometimes, maybe coyotes, maybe something worse. 2 days later, the first shot was fired, not at the house, not at the barn, at her. She was returning from the lookout tower, rifle slung, snow up to her calves. A single crack rang out and the bullet caught her in the leg, clean pass-through, just above the knee. She dropped into the drift, gritting her teeth, blood seeping through the white. Rook was on the trail instantly, barking and vanishing into the trees. Herschel found her minutes later, hauling her upright without a word. They patched the wound inside, cauterized it by firelight. She didn't scream. He paced the floor after, rage twisting in him like a storm. "I should have ridden out days ago," he growled. "No," she said, voice low. "You leave, they burn this place down. You can't fight them wounded." "I've fought worse. Wounded just means I've got a reason." The town offered nothing. The sheriff didn't come. Herschel's hands kept their distance. No one wanted to be on the wrong side of Donovan Blake. He rode with hired guns now, former soldiers, bounty men, outlaws bought and paid for, so she made a plan. "We let them come," she said. "We show them what justice looks like when it's patient, when it's hungry." He didn't argue. The house became a fortress. She lined the attic with powder charges, enough to bring down the front if needed. Rook took to sleeping on the roof, a silent watcher, and when the snow fell again, thicker than before, it buried the road and muffled the air. Herschel and Evelyn stood on the porch together one evening, breath white, silence thick. "You think we'll live through this?" he asked. She looked at him, and for once her face softened. "We survived everything else." Then the wind shifted, horses in the dark, the crunch of ice beneath hooves. Donovan Blake had come. The night swallowed sound. Snow muted the crunch of boots, the jingle of tack. Herschel stood at the parlor window, eyes narrowed, shotgun resting against his shoulder. Evelyn crouched behind the kitchen wall, rifle propped on the sill. Her leg throbbed from the wound, blood seeped through the linen wrap, but her hands were steady. They counted 6 riders. One hung back, horse-cloaked in black oilskin, Donovan Blake. She could feel him before she saw him, a presence that chilled the air more than the cold ever had. He was the kind of man who killed slow and smiled while doing it. "Hold," she whispered. Rook lay between them, unmoving. The dog had learned the language of battle. It waited, breath low and ears twitching, eyes locked on the crack in the door. A whistle cut through the dark, then another. A signal. They hit the barn first. Two peeled off and tossed torches into the hayloft. Flames swallowed dry straw in seconds, lighting the snow orange. The horses screamed. Evelyn gritted her teeth and took her first shot. It dropped the left rider mid-throw, torch clattering beside his boots. The second man turned to fire, but Herschel's shotgun blasted through the window before the man could raise his pistol. He crumpled beside the barn wall. The other four spread wide, flanking the house. Gunfire cracked through the trees. Rook bolted for the back door, silent and swift, vanishing into the storm like a spirit. Evelyn moved room to room, reloading, checking the traps, boards rigged to fall, wires stretched low with glass shards strung across like barbed teeth. One intruder hit the tripwire and screamed, falling face first into broken pottery and steel nails. Another tried the cellar door and took a bullet through the collarbone for his trouble. Herschel moved like a man possessed, precise, unflinching. He was not defending a house. He was defending a woman he no longer thought of as a stranger. And then Blake came forward, walking, not riding, through the flames and falling snow. He stood in front of the porch, hat low, hands empty. "Evie," he called, "you done enough, you give them their names. That's one thing, but killing Carver, that ain't forgivable." She stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, eyes locked on his. "You never forgave women for surviving you." Blake smiled. "I don't forgive anyone who runs." "I didn't run, I burned your past out behind me, one piece at a time." "Then come finish it." He dropped his coat. Beneath it, a pistol holstered low. Herschel stepped beside her. "He's baiting you." "I know. I can take him." "I know that too," she said, "but this one's mine." She stepped down into the snow. Her limp was nearly gone, her breath steamed. Blake stood 20 paces away. No trees. No cover, just snow and the weight of everything unspoken between them. "You killed my husband," she said, and bragged about it for a year. "He talked too much." "You burned those women outside Amarillo. They were sheltering outlaws. You strung me up and left me for the crows." He shrugged. "Should have died." She didn't speak again. The shot came so fast it split the wind. Blake's gun rose a breath too late. Her bullet caught him in the chest, just right of center, spinning him backward. He fell into the snow without a sound. His blood steamed where it touched the drift. She walked to him, stared down at the body, pulled the badge from his coat and tossed it into the fire still smoldering in the wreck of the barn. Rook reappeared minutes later, jaw streaked with blood. The last rider had tried to flee. He hadn't made it far. They buried the bodies past the cattle line. No markers, no names, just snow-covered earth. The barn was gone. The house bore bullet scars and the porch lane to one side. But the walls held, the roof stayed, the land endured. That night Evelyn sat beside Herschel, the firelight flickering across their faces. "It's done," she said. He didn't answer right away. Just looked at her, the woman who had crawled from his barn a shadow and now stood carved from steel. "No," he said finally, "it's just different now." She nodded, then she leaned her head on his shoulder, and neither of them moved until the fire burned down to quiet embers. The snow began to thaw in February. Runoff turned the pasture trails into ribbons of mud, and the cattle bawled more often as their hooves sank deep with every step. The barn remained a blackened frame, skeletal against the pale sky, but Herschel didn't rebuild it right away. Some ruins, he said, were better left visible. A warning, a memory, a proof. Evelyn rose each morning before the sun, feeding what livestock remained, walking the fence line with Rook close behind. Her leg had mended into a dull ache, a reminder stitched into flesh. The bullet hadn't shattered bone, but something else inside her had cracked that night, something old and buried, and now she felt lighter for it. The townsfolk changed, too. They didn't speak ill of her anymore. They didn't speak much at all. When she came into the feed store or the smithy, heads dipped in silence, not fear, something quieter, respect maybe, or a kind of grief. Herschel knew the town would never fully accept what had happened, but neither would they deny her place in it. The circuit judge wrote again. The testimony she gave had rippled beyond Kansas. 2 more marshals stripped of their badges. One hung for bounty killing under false warrants. Justice didn't always come clean, but sometimes it came in waves. She read the letter on the porch with Rook's head in her lap. Herschel sat beside her, oiling a saddle worn smooth from years of use. The sun spilled long across the yard. She held the letter out to him, but he didn't take it. He just said, "You going?" Evelyn shook her head. "It's over. The rest is paper. Then stay." It wasn't a question, and she didn't answer, not with words. She leaned her head against his shoulder, her hand resting lightly on his knee, and in that small, quiet motion the decision sealed itself. They cleared the ash from the barn one beam at a time. He rebuilt it with help from town, those few who still remembered what gratitude meant. She painted the new doors herself. Rook lay nearby, blinking slow, half-lidded, as if watching a long dream draw to close. She took to writing in the evenings, not for books or courtrooms, but to remember. The dog's wounds, the feel of snow during a siege. The look on Blake's face when he realized she had not broken. She wrote about fire, but she also wrote about stillness. About the strange, slow unfurling of safety. About a man who said little but gave her back a piece of the world. And in spring, when the calves were born and the orchard bloomed like it remembered joy, Herschel placed a new sign on the gate. Brand and Calloway, no titles, no pretense. Just 2 names that had survived everything the land could throw. Sometimes riders passed through, strangers asking questions, drifters with haunted eyes. Evelyn would stand with one hand on the fence, Rook at her feet, and she'd listen, quiet and steady. Not all of them were looking for blood. Some were looking for stories. Others just wanted to know what kind of place let a woman rebuild herself from bone and vengeance. She told them only what they needed. And once they were gone, she'd walk back to the house, to the man who waited with coffee and a wordless kind of loyalty, and she'd smile. Not the wide, open kind, not the smile of girls in churchyard dresses. This one was narrower, sharper. The smile of someone who had been hunted and healed and come out of the fire not clean, but whole. In the end, the town didn't stay silent because they feared her. They stayed silent because they understood. Some women become ghosts when you try to bury them. Others learn to ride through flame. Evelyn Calloway had done both.